Extracting wisdom from the book, Atlas of the Heart, written by Brené Brown. Why do we often confuse different emotions, and this causes us suffering? Because the brain has over 87 distinct emotions, we only have vocabulary to describe about 3 to 5 basic emotions. When we cannot name emotions correctly, we cannot process them effectively. Just like a doctor cannot cure illness with wrong diagnosis, distinguishing between anxiety and stress is the first step to resolving them. Why do people often avoid uncomfortable emotions instead of facing them? Because we are taught that negative emotions are signs of weakness, but research shows that emotion avoidance makes them stronger and longer lasting, while naming and acknowledging emotions reduces their intensity by 40% in just a few minutes. Why is vulnerability the true source of courage? Because courage is not about being fearless, but about showing up and letting others see your true self despite the risk of rejection or judgment. The most courageous people are those who dare to share vulnerability instead of hiding behind armor of perfection. Why are shame and guilt two completely different emotions, yet we often confuse them? Because shame says, "I'm bad," while guilt says, "I did something bad." This difference is critically important because shame destroys the self and leads to depression, while guilt drives positive change and corrects wrong behavior. Why is gratitude not just an attitude but a daily practice? Because the brain has a natural negativity bias to protect us from danger, so we need to actively practice gratitude 5 to 10 minutes daily to rebalance. People who practice gratitude regularly have 23% higher serotonin levels and are significantly less anxious than those who don't practice. Why can envy be a compass pointing to your dreams? Because envy tells us exactly what matters to us, but is missing. Instead of suppressing this emotion, ask yourself, what does this person have that I crave? The answer will reveal your true goals and transform envy into motivation for action. Why is disappointment completely different from sadness? Because disappointment occurs when expectations are not met and can be fixed by adjusting expectations, while sadness is a response to irreversible loss and needs time to heal. Understanding this difference helps us choose the right coping method instead of applying the wrong approach. Why is perfectionism the greatest enemy of self-esteem? Because perfectionism is not motivation to excel, but a shield to protect oneself from judgment. It makes us believe that if we're perfect we won't be criticized, but research shows this leads to severe anxiety, procrastination, and fear of failure rather than success. Why is loneliness not the same as solitude? Because loneliness is the feeling of lacking meaningful connection with others even when in a crowd, while solitude is the conscious choice to be alone and recharge energy. You can feel lonely among 1,000 people, full of energy when in solitude alone. Why does empathy only have power when accompanied by clear boundaries? Because empathy without boundaries becomes pity or carrying others' emotions, causing us to burn out and unable to help anyone. True empathy is understanding and being with others while maintaining your own identity and energy. Why is hope not an emotion but a cognitive strategy? Because research shows hope consists of 3 elements that must be learned and practiced, which are clear goals, concrete pathways, and belief in overcoming obstacles, not naturally occurring but must be actively built. People with high hope succeed 40% more than those lacking hope. Why is heartbreak not just a metaphor but a real physical sensation? Because when experiencing emotional injury, the brain activates the same region that processes physical pain. That's why we feel actual pain in the chest during breakup or losing loved ones. fMRI studies prove physical painkillers also reduce mental pain. Why do worrying and fear need to be distinguished for effective handling? Because fear is a response to present specific threat and requires immediate action, while worrying is anticipation of future threats that may not happen and needs thought management skills. Confusing these two makes us react incorrectly, like fleeing what hasn't happened or freezing before real danger. Why is learned helplessness more dangerous than actual failure? Because when experiencing many uncontrollable situations, the brain learns to believe that effort is futile, leading to learned helplessness that makes us give up even when opportunities for success exist. This explains why many talented people dare not try after consecutive failures. Why is curiosity the antidote to judgment and prejudice? Because curiosity and judgment cannot coexist simultaneously in the brain. When we shift from judgment mode to asking what makes this person act this way, the prefrontal cortex activates and turns off the emotional reaction region, helping us understand instead of attack. Why is boredom a sign of unmet psychological needs? Because boredom is not lack of activity, a lack of meaning and connection. The brain needs a sense of contribution and importance. When lacking this, we feel empty even when busy. The solution is not doing more but finding more meaningful work. Why do stress and anxiety, though similar, need different handling methods? Because stress has specific external causes, like deadlines or work pressure, and decreases when problems are solved. While anxiety is a diffuse internal state, without clear cause and needs psychological intervention. Knowing the difference helps us choose the right solution instead of seeking external causes for anxiety. Why is vulnerability the strongest bridge between people? Because when we dare to share the imperfect aspects of ourselves, others feel safe to also open up, creating authentic connection instead of surface relationships. Research shows the strongest relationships are built on authenticity, not perfection. Why is burnout not simply fatigue but a crisis of meaning? Because burnout occurs when we work non-stop without seeing value or impact of our efforts, not just lacking physical energy, but also depleting meaning. The solution is not more rest but reconnecting with purpose and core values. Why are humor and joy not avoidance of difficulties, but survival strategies? Because research shows humor in difficult circumstances is not denial of suffering but the brain's way of creating psychological distance to process, releasing endorphins that reduce stress and maintain hope. People who survive trauma often have the ability to find humor amid difficulties. Why is self-compassion not weakness, but the strength of maturity? Because self-compassion means treating yourself as you would treat a close friend going through difficulties, instead of harsh self-criticism. Research proves self-compassion helps recover 60% faster after failure and courageously try again instead of fear or avoidance. Why is anger not an emotion to eliminate but a message to decode? Because anger is often the surface emotion hiding pain, fear, or helplessness deep inside. Instead of suppressing or exploding, ask yourself what emotion is hiding behind anger. The answer will lead to real solutions instead of just venting emotions. Why is contentment the key to sustainable happiness? Because in consumer society, the brain is constantly stimulated by wanting more, but research shows happiness doesn't increase after reaching basic living standards. People who know contentment have 40% lower cortisol levels and feel deeper satisfaction than those always chasing more. Why can regret be powerful motivation if used correctly? Because regret is not useless self-blame but valuable information about our values and priorities. When asking if I could go back, what would I do differently? The answer shows what truly matters and guides future decisions instead of just being stuck in the past. Why is surprise the most important emotion for learning ability? Because surprise is the brain's signal that our expectations are wrong and we need to update our world model. When we still have the capacity for surprise, it means we're still open to learning. People who lose this ability often fall into rigid states and stop developing. Why are suffering and misery two completely different psychological states? Because suffering is the unavoidable pain of life, like loss or failure, while misery, self-inflicted pain from resistance or telling negative stories about suffering. We cannot avoid suffering but can choose not to add misery by accepting instead of fighting.